no one wants to get that call in the middle of the night with bad news. When you get a call in the middle of the night that might be what it is, and that's what people think before they answer that phone. It was that way for Louis and Zélie, only of course it wasn't a phone call in the 1800s. It was a door knock in the middle of the night. And it was the wet nurse for their little 2-month-old Melanie Therese returning the child to the family. And let me give you a little bit of backstory before we go on. In Zélie's life, she really wanted to nurse her children, and try as she might, she was not able to do it. And we know that she wrote letters to her sister, letters to her mother-in-law. She did a lot of communicating, and we have some of those letters. And I will read to you what she said about this. What troubles me is to think of having to put my baby with a wet nurse again. It's so difficult to find good people. I would also like to have the wet nurse live at our house, but that's impossible. In the end, I think God will help me. He knows well that it's not laziness that keeps me from nursing my children, because I'm not afraid of the effort. And so she really did want that, and she really did try. And sometimes we want something, we don't get to have it, so you have to go to the next plan. And that was getting a wet nurse. And there were a lot of factors involved with each child that was coming. The availability of a wet nurse, and could she live in the home? Many of them couldn't because they had families of their own. That's why they were lactating. They were having children and families of their own. So often they couldn't live with the Martins, but that was a possibility. And sometimes they weren't available. They were already hired for someone else, or maybe they were pregnant, whatever the situation was. So each time it was a challenge making it fit. And in the case of Melanie Therese coming, they didn't have many choices. Also, how close that the wet nurse would live, and the accessibility of the child to Zélie. And Zélie, she wasn't strong in her health, in that way. She had health issues, and she had just given birth to Melanie Therese. She was only 2 months old. This particular wet nurse that they had vetted, got recommendations for, made the choice, it ended up that she was incompetent, that she did let the child waste away. Basically, Melanie Therese was starving that night that she brought her. And this woman apparently didn't want the child to die in her care. So she gets them to their house at the last minute so that she doesn't have to deal with that. And so this night is a horrible night for Zélie. The first thing she does, grab the child and head out to another wet nurse who didn't live close, but she goes there and she gets to her house, and the woman is sick. Her milk is dried up. She is not able to nurse. And of course, how would Zélie know? It's not like you could call. So she wasted precious time to go there. And then it's just too late. With these little bodies, when the organs start to shut down, things start to cascade, it can happen quick. And Melanie Therese, 2 months old, died in her mother's arms. And so that was a horrific night. There was a lot for Zélie to deal with, and her family was very concerned in the months that followed for her mental health. She almost went insane over this. 2 factors involved here. One, anger and hatred towards that woman that basically killed her daughter indirectly, but did, through neglect. There was that issue, but then there was her own. All the what ifs. What if I had chosen someone else? The other wet nurse, even though she lived further away, would have been a better choice. What if I had gone to see Melanie this week for whatever reason? Zélie had a family, she had a business, and she'd just given birth, and she didn't have good health. So entrusting the child to someone else and not being able to go for frequent visits, especially since she didn't live very close, It's understandable. You can just imagine what went on in this woman's mind. And I'm not exactly sure what her path to healing was, but she did find it. In today's world, we've got a lot of paths to healing. One, as far as the forgiveness goes, there is the sacrament of confession. And even if we're a victim of something and not guilty, or if we have some small part to play or none at all or the whole thing, the confessional, that sacrament, the graces received there are very helpful towards healing. Also, like Chris Stefanik has a great series that came out this year on forgiveness. It's a 5-part series. Really is helpful to find healing. Dr. Bob Schutz has a book, Be Healed. It's also very helpful for all the traumas that we've been through and the things that we've done sinful, both, whether the victim or otherwise. Very good to heal and address some things, and that's at the JP2 Institute for Healing. There's a lot, and for post-abortive women or men who've had some kind of hand in an abortion or neglect or didn't intervene, whatever, there are the Rachel's Vineyard retreats, which are amazing for healing. There is healing, and God wants healing for us no matter what has happened to us and no matter what we have done. And it's there. It takes hard work. I don't know what Zélie did, but I do know that she adopted an attitude about the importance of her children having existed even though they died, because she lost 4 children. Altogether, she ends up having 9, and 4 of them die when they're very young. And she wrote this in a letter. When I closed the eyes of my dear little children, and when I buried them, I felt great pain. But it was always with resignation. I didn't regret the sorrow and the problems that I had endured for them. Several people said to me, it would be much better never to have had them. I cannot bear that kind of talk. I don't think the sorrows and problems could be weighed against the eternal happiness of my children. So they're not lost forever. We'll see them again in heaven. I mean, they get to exist. That's the thing about being human. We are going to exist forever. And so she's saying all this sorrow, it's worth it because they're here. And it was obviously part of her mission in life. And so I know she had a good attitude about that, this eternal perspective, which is so helpful. We don't know exactly the process that Zélie went through for her healing, but we know that she did heal. She did achieve sainthood. Sometimes we think about the Martins as this idyllic family when we read Zélie's writings, and she wrote a lot, letters she wrote to her mother-in-law, she wrote to her sister, we have some of those. It wasn't idyllic, it was real. There were a lot of joys. The children did plays for the family. They really enjoyed each other. They went on picnics. They had fun together. They had a dog named Tom. It was joyful and it was sorrowful. It had real challenges, but at the same time, it was beautiful. And so they just embraced this life knowing this was the path to sanctity, and it's been proved out by the canonizations that have come through this family. Zélie, she did grow in holiness, and she achieved a high degree of sanctity, obviously, and she's a canonized saint. But in her prayer time and in her pondering, she remembered thinking less of herself, that she hadn't reached that degree because she was sure she didn't have to deal with physical attacks of the devil, that he only really bothers those saintly people who are very far advanced in the spiritual life, like Padre Pio or something, physical attacks. And as she thought that, she had a grip, an animal-like vice grip on her shoulder, a claw that held on for a good long while. And I think that the Lord permitted this to let her know there's a devil that would like to rip you to pieces. You have reached this degree, and he would like to bother you, but you've got a family to raise, and I'm taking care of you and your family, and I'm not going to allow this. And so she just, she prayed to the Lord. She wasn't alarmed. She wasn't all scared and wigged out like we might be if somebody grabbed us by the shoulder that we couldn't see in our prayer time, and we knew that it was a demon, And so she just prayed, and it disappeared. And she completely trusted in the Lord. But Jesus was letting her know, yes, married life was a path for you, and you've done well.